real estate operates on a lag.
Yeah.
And what I mean by that is whether it's going all the way up to like macroeconomic policy decisions made by the Fed, all the way down to the decisions that you make as an individual or as a firm, all of those take years to feel.
Welcome to the Creating Wealth Podcast, where Kyle Curtin takes you on an extraordinary journey alongside renowned multifamily real estate experts from every corner of the United States. We teach you how to harness the power of real estate investing and witness the transformation of your wealth building strategy. Let's create wealth together.
What's up, guys? Welcome to episode 146 of the Creating Wealth Podcast. Today, we get the great pleasure of chatting with Mike Marchetti. He is a phenomenal investor out of Central Mass and has accumulated a portfolio of over 750 units over the past 6 years. Super excited to jump on with you, Mike. Holy crap, man. Welcome.
Yeah, hey, thanks. This is actually my first time being on a podcast. I was supposed to be on another one a few years ago, but even though the guy heard my story, thought that my career was kind of cool to hear about, he ultimately disinvited me because I didn't have enough followers. So I didn't realize that was a prerequisite for going on a podcast, was to just have followers.
I didn't either.
Thank you for inviting me on your podcast to talk about real estate.
Hell yeah, man. That's messed up. You know what? His loss, man. This is the real Mike Marchetti in the room right here. Hell yeah, man. No, I'm super pumped to dig into your story, man, you know, and so yeah, pretty much like anywhere that you want to jump in, man, you know, and kind of like how it all started, like where you grew up, like how you got into the industry, like anywhere you want to jump in is totally cool. Talk about like your like 7th grade Little League like World Series, like fuck yeah, you know, like wherever you want to jump in is awesome, man.
Yeah, I think seventh grade might be an inappropriate year to start because that was the year that my science teacher told me that I'd never make anything of myself.
That's a great start.
Yeah. So
nice.
I think let's start, you know, in college, right? So
sure.
What made me really want to get into real estate was that I had a really freak medical accident the week that I moved away for grad school. I had a perforated ulcer, almost died. I was like maybe a couple of hours away from actually dying. So it was kind of a, you know, terrible ordeal. If you Google it, like that's what killed J.R.R. Tolkien. So, you know, I'd at least have been in good company.
Yeah.
But I survived, thankfully. And after that happened, all I could think was, oh man, I have a fiance. When I get out of school, we're getting married. How am I going to be able to protect her in the event that I die early? Because I've already almost died in like 23 years old at the time. And so I had just moved away and I was in my first apartment ever because I'd always lived at home. And I talked to my parents for lunch one day when they were visiting me. And because of course it was right after I died. So of course they flew out to go see me.
Yeah.
But they had, I had talked to them about it because they had both owned real estate. Like my mom and dad owned a couple of buildings in my town that they sold when I was like in 7th grade, actually. And before that, my grandparents had owned property. And I remembered growing up and seeing rent checks coming in the mail, like through my Nana's mail slot that she had in her door. Nice. There was like 24 checks that would roll in on the first of the month, and I was always there for that. And so I remembered seeing that, but I remember asking my parents when I was younger, like, hey guys, does this make any money? And, you know, at the time they had bought the buildings back in the 80s when the new tax laws had come out, and it was really just like a tax shelter for them. It was always income for my grandfather, but my parents were never really into it. They just did it for the tax benefits. They were both executives at a Fortune 500 company. And so the money to them was like this, obviously, right? Like I grew up I've been very fortunate in the circumstances in which I grew up. And so, you know, I always would say like, hey, how do you guys feel about this when I was growing up? And they'd say, this is horrible. It's a lot of work. It's not a lot of money. And, you know, I just kind of got the impression that it was sort of bullshit. So when I go off to grad school and I'm paying this guy $1,650 a month, and I know he doesn't answer my emails. I'm like, so I talked to them at lunch. They said, yeah, he's probably making, he owns the buildings outright. So, he's probably making about, $1,000 a month off of your rent. And I did the math in my head right away because the guy had 27 units in Arlington, Virginia. And I was like, okay, I could live on $27,000 a month.
Yeah.
I could live well on 27 a month. And so shortly after that, when I was in grad school, all I could think about was real estate. I got out. I'm an economics major, and my master's is in economics. And I started going into the personal financial field. And the whole time I was there, all I could think about was real estate. So I started hunting for my first deal in 2016 while I was still working my office job. And I closed on my first fourplex like a couple days before my 27th birthday, a couple days after my 27th birthday. And I've been in the industry ever since. And I stupidly quit my job right after I got that fourplex because it made me the same amount of money as my job did after taxes. So I don't recommend that, by the way. Anyone watching this who is just getting started in real estate, don't be an idiot. Stay in your job for as long as you can until you're comfortable enough to leave. Because I sure as hell wasn't. Because then the day after I quit, one of my tenants started deciding not to pay me. So,
oh no,
that's what it is. So it kind of started off like that, and from there I did a lot of work in the building, and it ended up being worth a lot more. This was back in 2017, late 2016, early 2017. So the environment was way different. Like you could buy a great fourplex in a great area around me for, you could buy it at like an 11 or 12 cap, and the interest rate would be like 3.5%.
Yeah.
Where the hell are you going to find that now?
Yeah.
So I just kind of kept ripping equity out. And then I discovered commercial multifamily, and my whole world changed. So I started doing exclusively commercial multifamily the day after my first refi on that, because I realized that they use the income approach instead of just going based off of what your neighbor sells their threeplex for or their fourplex for. So yeah, that was kind of how my career totally started.
I love that, man. Holy crap. And especially like I'm really glad you made a comment about like keeping your day job as well in there, because I was just going to ask like your thoughts on that, because I was just having a conversation with somebody last night about that, and how powerful that can be for a lot of different reasons, building up your portfolio while still being steady at the same time, because there's a lot of shit out there that take it with a grain of salt, however you want, guys, or whatever, but like, oh, if you leave your job, like you'll like figure out a way, and like intense accountability and hoorah, like, and it's like I don't know. I mean, along with the along with like the consistent income from W-2 checks or 1099 checks, depending on what you do or whatever, but also from the security of the benefits and stuff like that. And for those times when you get kicked in the teeth in a little bit, when the tenants start not paying, or a boiler goes in the middle of the winter, whatever, you're not scrambling trying to figure out where the hell you're getting money from, and that's huge. Yeah.
And realistically, like you never stop getting kicked in the teeth. That's why I can't stress enough that, you really need to be tough to do this. This is only a side job if you're addicted to working in a very toxic way.
Yeah.
For the rest of us, it has to be a main job.
Yeah.
Because most people that do it part-time do it very poorly.
Yep.
And like you said, the stability of having a job is extremely important, because for the first few deals, the bank's going to want to know that you make money, right? Like
weird.
So keep in mind, like this, like when I quit my job, I had to have my wife co-sign on some loans because she was the only one that was working, even though I was doing commercial loans, because they're still like, hey, you're a jobless hack. You're very risky. We're not lending to you. Get your wife on. So that was what I did. So my wife was on several properties with me in the beginning, and like that was just kind of the way how it started. But yeah, like I tell everyone, don't quit your day job until you're super goddamn comfortable, like to the point where you're making more than your salary.
Yeah.
Because at that point, you can comfortably quit and not really lose a lot in terms of standard of living. Of course, even though I recommend that, most people who are in real estate are very sadistic by nature. Like my good friend and partner, Ryan Corcoran, I advised him not to quit his job because he was making a comfortable 6-figure salary. And I was like, dude, don't be an idiot. Don't quit your job.
Yeah.
First thing he does, be an idiot, quit his job. But then like the next year he made like $1 million net. So who am I supposed to like, what am I supposed to do on that? I'm like, look, man, it was good advice. You just, you made up for it by being more talented on the back end. So, but most people can't do that. Like the odds of someone going into real estate and then very next year making $1 million is like
slim,
microscopic.
Yeah. And I think that's definitely another thing to be added to that conversation, you know, is like, you know, because it's just, I feel like it's so like glamorized. Like I've heard it from so many different people, man, of like, oh, it's the sexy thing to do. Like, like just quit and like, you'll make all this money later and all this shit. And it's like, all right, like, let's like stand down for a second and like, just think about this logically here. Like, you know, and yeah, man, absolutely. And to kind of move on from that, man, like I do really admire the, you know, jumping from the first property, you know, and kind of taking that a little bit of a different turn, you know, instead of continuing to buy the smaller unit buildings, jumping into, you know, the 5+ unit multis where the valuation is done much differently. You know, it's kind of a different game than exactly like, you know, just going off of comps and that kind of thing. So take us kind of through, you know, what was that first commercial multi that you bought after, you know, making the transition, I guess, if you will, from resi into the commercial space and continuing to hammer on that?
Yeah, sure. So the very first one that I did was a 6-unit in Leominster, Massachusetts. Good location. At the time, it was just a great place for cash flow. You could pick up most properties at like a 10 or 11, sometimes 12 cap. Yep. This one was a 12 cap. And it was purchased by a note buyer because back then there were actual foreclosures and you could make a living as a note buyer. You still can, obviously, and the guys that do it are fantastic at it, but I'm not good at it. And so I view it as being a very hard thing, especially with such a scarce supply of defaulted debt. However, you know, we're talking, you know, 8 years after the recession, things still weren't great. Like a lot of the guys that are coming up today have no idea what that environment was like because you were still seeing tons of like absolute, like ridiculous deals coming through on the foreclosure side well into like the late teens. And so these guys, they had this note and they wanted to offload the property. They foreclosed on the previous owner and they, you know, had a super low basis. They just wanted to get rid of it. So I swooped in, got the discount, and it was a 6-unit. And we did a bunch of work in the units themselves. And I was expecting it like because obviously back then I was just doing the work and then refinancing like the standard BRRRR play or whatever.
Yep.
And when I started doing commercial and I did my first commercial refinance, the property appraised for like $150,000 more than I had expected. And so that was like kind of like the aha moment for me. Where all of a sudden, instead of comparing it to the 6-plex down the street that had just sold for like pennies on the dollar because the place was about to be condemned, all of a sudden they were actually looking at my performance as an operator. And that was sort of like the turning point for me where I was like, oh, there's actually wiggle room in here if you have skill. This is great. So that was when things really changed for me and it sort of altered my business model. I changed the way in which I approached the deal too. So instead of just like buying, doing the work and refinancing, what I do now is I'll buy a property with a construction loan attached to it. They'll do an as is and as complete appraisal so that there's no reappraisal risk when you go to, when you're thinking about like what this thing is going to ultimately be worth. You go in, you get the construction funds, you rip through it. And then once that's done, you've already gotten all your construction money out. And then you can make the decision to refinance into either agency debt or another bank loan. And for those of you that are kind of newer, agency debt is going through like a Fannie or a Freddie. Usually it's done through, ideally you'd want a loan broker, like especially my good friend, Pat Brady, who's been doing all of my loans forever. He's probably the best in the business in New England. Actually, I know he's the best in the business in New England. He was the one who really introduced me to this whole process of going to agency debt at the end. And that way you get like a nice, good 10-year fixed term. Everything's great. Like the appraisals are awesome because they use national firms like that always go in, and the appraisals are always nice and fat. So it's a great process that commercial has that residential just completely lacks.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense, man. Absolutely. And I think it's incredibly interesting too. The amount of flexibility in like on the commercial side versus the resi side, a lot more, you can definitely speak on it a lot better than I can. You know what I mean? I'm not in that space quite yet, but like, like just check these 3 boxes and like stay under the DTI and like you're golden, and switching it to like, oh, well, here's like, interest only. And here's like, a lot of different variables to be manipulated to be able to, make the deals on that side work and that type of thing.
Absolutely. I feel as though a lot of people get discouraged by the residential market and never try the commercial as a result.
Yeah.
When commercial really is probably the best place at which to start. And I can give a good example of this too. So I have a good friend that I went to high school with, top 5 smartest people I've ever met in my life, like absolutely ran circles around me in school, much smarter than me, very talented, very articulate, sounds suffocatingly intelligent. And he is a fierce negotiator. He started off trying nothing but residential with creative financing. And the problem with that is that no matter how smart he is, appraisers are always going to be dumber. And he never really got to get enough deals in the early goings of his career. He was looking for great deals in the residential market that he could get seller financing on. It's such a different game. You have to find a perfect deal.
Yeah.
You have to wait, pick your shots. In commercial, it's not like that. You just need to find a deal that's good enough.
Yeah.
Good enough for you or good enough for your investors if you're a syndicator. That's all you need. That's it. And you can go based off the numbers. And if your numbers are good, the thing's going to pencil out every single time.
Yeah.
Residential, you get one bad appraisal. And trust me, I've had plenty of them. You get one bad appraisal, your whole plan's fucked up for the whole year.
Yeah.
It's awful.
Damn, man. Hell yeah. There's one thing that you just made me think of, man, that I really, really liked, and I've continued to think about it. It was something that you mentioned to me not too long ago about like a decision that you make today in real estate, you could feel the effects like 3 years later.
Yeah.
And man, like if you could talk about that for a minute, because like literally, Mike, like that's when I forget like what we were talking about or whatever, man, but like you brought it up.
Too.
And
I was probably high.
And I've continued to think about that, man. And I'm like, I've literally like told people about that. Like it's because it's such I just found it incredibly fascinating, like that principle. And like, I feel it with Lemonster. I'm like, December is going to be 3 years for me. And I'm like, you definitely didn't feel it in the first year, 2 years in. I'm like, I'm like, I physically start to like feel what Mike is talking about. I'm like, everything's a lot different. There's still, a bit of room to go, more, rent increases and that kind of thing towards the end of the year. But, I see that, man. And I'm like, damn, like,
it's hard, dude. And it's a hard thing to experience, right? Because real estate operates on a lag.
Yeah.
And what I mean by that is whether it's going all the way up to like macroeconomic policy decisions made by the Fed, all the way down to the decisions that you make as an individual or as a firm, all of those take years to feel.
Yeah.
But they really do take years. So for instance, like with these rate hikes, people were like, oh, it's been a year in, nobody's felt anything. Now go ask people in Texas how they feel. Go ask people in Florida how they feel. Arizona, they're hemorrhaging money. They're underwater on a ton of properties. People are selling stuff off for less than what they owe on it because it just took time for it to happen, right? Yeah. And a lot of that has to do with just the sluggishness of the industry. And in our case, like as operators, we face a slightly different challenge, but it's the same sort of general principle. If you have a project that you're working on that, you go in and let's say it's a larger one, the project that you very wonderfully worked on in Fitchburg for us. That one, we bought that in 2022.
Yep.
And you go in and you have all these numbers, right? But there's a story behind the numbers that takes years to feel. Like I knew that I was going to have to get rid of 30% of the tenant population because they were actually violent criminals. However, the process of getting them out isn't as binary as yes, I will do this, therefore they're going to be gone tomorrow. Yeah. And this work will be done the very next day. And then boom, here we go. I have 30 more units that are all leased up in the same 3 weeks or month or whatever. It doesn't work like that. Evictions take 5 to 6 months. It takes another, if you have a talented contractor, you might get a few units every month or two. And if you have 30 units to do, there you go. That's that whole time. Yeah. And so my vision in 2022 is going to get realized in 2025.
Yeah.
For the whole project, right? And that's just the way it's going to be. And there's nothing you can do to control it. It's just something that you have to go into every decision understanding full well that whatever your plan is, it's not happening for a while. So make sure that as an operator, or especially as a syndicator, plug that stuff in, because you can't control for it in a way that you may want to. No matter how talented you are, you're still constrained by the law and by other humans. So always go into every decision understanding that in real estate, it is like a 3-year process to stabilize any decent sized property. Sometimes more. I mean, I can't imagine how those guys feel that have 1,000 unit complex or whatever, and they have to go and actually renovate 1,000 units. Good luck doing that, along with your pro forma. So that's one thing that I've really altered over the years. All of your stuff, any decision that you make, it takes 3 years to stabilize a property. Sometimes less if things go your way, which frankly, not a lot of stuff does in the asset class in which I operate anyway, which is Class C multifamilies in New England, where every heater is terrible and every system is atrocious. For instance, last year, I was actually supposed to reach the pro forma on one of my projects up in New Hampshire, but then 25% of the tenants left in the middle of winter. And we had 41 boilers to replace throughout my portfolio. Ouch. And probably 15 of them were in that portfolio alone. And there were only 15 buildings. So we had to replace every single boiler in the whole portfolio in a year. And if you're not prepared for that psychologically, you're done. You can't be in this industry, because this is going to happen to you whenever you're in Class C properties, no matter where you are. And so just be prepared. You need to make sure that your CapEx is on point. You need to make sure you have a construction loan backing you, because you don't want to have to go into your bank account, or worse, into your investors' bank accounts to get that money back, because no one's going to respect you as soon as you have to do that.
Yeah.
So be smart. Think critically, and think about all of the things that can go wrong, because the odds are, even if you have 5 years like I did where nothing bad happened, that 6th year is going to absolutely destroy you.
Yeah.
If you're not careful.
Yeah, man. That's so wild too. It's it's, one of those things when it rains, it pours, and just the unexpected. And I love how we, kind of keep talking about that, man. It's interesting, in this industry, when the unexpected stuff happens, and when you're forced to either sink or swim, when those unexpected events come up, and, it's you can either, be super prepared and try to get the calluses from it, or in the stripes and that kind of thing, be able to, I don't know if it's becoming numb to things the more that you experience, or if it's just accepting that it's part of the game, you know what I mean? That you're going to get fucked occasionally, you know what I mean? And
dude, you get fucked all the time. Yeah. I mean, that's the whole thing about this industry. You're basically you better bring the lube.
Yes.
Exactly. Better bring the lube, and make sure it's good stuff, dude, because this industry is just going to pound you out if you're not careful.
Exactly, man.
And I would say that one thing that I see a lot of these days, even from people that are buying my properties, is that I usually know a lot of lenders and I can usually find out what they're thinking of for pro forma numbers.
Yep.
Don't overestimate your projected rents. Don't underestimate your projected vacancy. Don't underestimate the amount of delinquency, because I guarantee you, no matter whose portfolio you buy, it's going to be much worse than you expect initially. So be conservative. That's something that I've changed over the course of my career. You have to be as conservative as possible when you underwrite, so that you can take all of the bad things that could happen, absorb them, work them into your numbers, and make a worst case scenario for yourself or for your investors, depending on whether you're doing this for yourself or whether you're a syndicator.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, man. Especially, I mean, nowadays when, like, you know, a lot of deals are super tight, you know, to begin with, you know what I mean, with where debt is and that kind of thing. And it's like, oh, well, like maybe we can be, you know, maybe we're a little too conservative, like, you know, kind of right on the line. Maybe, you know, we can make it work. And it's definitely something to keep in mind, you know, to, you know, kind of hunker down a little bit in terms of trying to expect, you know, at least some of the unexpected, and kind of build in a little bit of a buffer there for when things hit the fan.
Yes, absolutely. And another thing that's really common too is that, you know, when people will do these pro forma, you know, again, they're not taking into account the time that it takes to do these things. And so they'll be like, oh yeah, like I'll make an 11% return cash on cash year one, and then it'll be 14% year two. But in reality, it's like 2% year one, 8% year two. And then you reach that third year and things start performing to your expectations. But you lose out on those first two. And especially in this environment, like you said, this is the worst environment that I've seen in my whole lifetime, right? I would, obviously 2008 was the worst thing I've ever seen. But I wasn't involved in the business at the time. However, as soon as you hit 2013 or whenever the market bottomed out here, because again, real estate takes a super long time because of the lags. Our market bottomed in 2013, even though the crisis happened, really started in 2007. So when I first got into this business, it was very different. Like my credit card was 9%.
Yeah.
It's not uncommon to have mortgages in like the 7.5 range in commercial right now. So that would be like me putting my mortgage, not quite because of the amortization, but it's a lot like putting a mortgage on a damn credit card from when I first started compared to right now. The deals are tight. The prices are higher than they should be. And that's kind of a recipe for screwing yourself over if you're not careful. So you got to be careful. If you're getting started right now, you like be careful. It may always seem like real estate always goes up, but from like 1972 until 1994, it was a bear market, a huge bear market, a series of bear markets that basically, if inflation were not there during that time period, you would have seen massive drop-offs in prices. But you did still see that. It just was masked by the inflation. So really, like a lot of us that are alive today who aren't, you know, in their 60s or later, they don't know about that period, right? Yeah. Like the 1970s through 90s were a terrible time to be in real estate. And yet guys like Arnold Schwarzenegger were able to amass a huge fortune during that time period because they adapted to the environment. So although I'm not used to this environment, someone coming up today is going to do phenomenally well in this environment. They're going to figure it out. They'll figure it out faster than I am, and they'll do fantastically. But for the rest of us, for those of us that aren't super brilliant people, you got to be prepared, and you know, hopefully your expectations come true, but you got to be conservative about it and make sure you pick your shots. This is definitely, like, in my view, this is like a home run only environment. I will not do a deal unless it's a home run right now. Yeah. In 2021, 2020, early 2022, you could be the biggest dumbass on the face of this earth and you could make money in real estate.
Yeah.
Today, you can't be a dumbass.
Yep.
And that's the big distinguishing factor.
Yeah. That makes a whole lot of sense, man. It's almost like the tide's gone out, you know, so you can see who's like, you know, all of a sudden it's like, oh, like you actually have to have skill as an asset manager to like keep things flowing the right way and not just, you know,
And not only that, you had to have skill 3 years ago.
Yeah. Now it's just exposed that like you have to be able to perform because times are definitely different.
Yes. Yes. And that's why I made a lot of preparations in 2021 for this. I refinanced all my stuff at super low rates, and I have most of it locked in for the next 7 to 10 years.
Yeah.
And there's a reason for that. It's because I read the tea leaves. I started seeing my construction costs going up dramatically. Materials were twice as expensive by the end of 2021. And all I could think was, this is only going to get worse. Yeah. And I didn't trust the Federal Reserve's take on the matter, because inflation is very rarely transient, right? Like it's hard once things go up in price for them to just immediately go back down, or for disinflation to happen quickly. It always struck me as kind of like unusual that would be the case. However, in the earliest goings, I thought, yeah, it's probably like a quarter or two is transitory, but all of a sudden you get into 3 quarters and you're like, okay, then the 4th quarter hits and you're like, all right, I better start doing this right now. So that was why in the 4th quarter of 2021, I refinanced all my stuff, and that was what I had to do. And it was the right call. I could have easily been wrong. I mean, a lot of people are wrong all the time, including very intelligent people. But I happened to be right at that moment. And it's because I was seeing and feeling those things in my own industry, and I knew it wasn't going to be quick.
Yeah. I think there's so much value in that as well, man, of like kind of reading the writing on the wall, especially at that time, like, looking at the variables that are changing in the moment, and exactly like something like that of like construction costs, and that kind of thing, to kind of give you a little bit of a different, observation of what's going on in the macro and the bigger picture, to then, figure out what you need to do to, basically kind of weather the storm as things continue to go in the opposite direction from what you're hoping for. Yeah.
Totally.
Yeah, man.
Totally, man. Yeah, I couldn't agree more.
So what's next for you, Mike? I know we were talking a little bit before the show, like, deals are kind of hard to come by right now. How are you, I guess, continuing to, what are you working on right now, in the current environment? Yeah. I know we talked about it, but yeah.
So, I think that a lot of people that are in real estate, they always assume that we're never going to pay taxes. It's not true.
You pay taxes? No, I'm just kidding.
I haven't yet. However, I know this year my tax bill is going to be insane. So I'm trying to basically just buy buildings for the cost seg, and trying to put as little of my own money into the deal as possible. However, I'm only doing that a few times just to try to kill off some of my tax bill. And other than that, I mean, I'm working on some flips. I'm hoping to do like 40 of those this year, maybe, with my partner, Ryan. And I am working on acquiring plumbing companies.
Hell yeah. I love that, man. Especially that's something too, man. Like, it was I asked in my group like last week or a couple weeks ago how people are, navigating the current environment right now, by doing, potentially like altering, I guess, like their main focuses and that kind of thing. Like, are people doing ancillary businesses? Are people switching from multis to flips? Like, how are people kind of navigating the whole ecosystem at the moment, and I think it makes a lot of sense, man, and I mean, especially, I think it's cool as shit with the like the plumbing companies as well, like something that's ancillary, something that, do you think that, because I love having this conversation with people too, man, like when you buy like a plumbing or like a construction or any sort of, company that complements the real estate at the same time, do you see a direct correlation / benefit, wherever the right word is for this, that I'm trying to mention, to being able to like, drop your costs down significantly in terms of rehab, depending on like, basically like, does buying the plumbing company give you the ability to like, make more attractive offers to sellers because you have like less line items, because you have like the things like cross over into each other? Or is it just kind of separate?
I will never give a seller a more attractive offer just because I own a plumbing company. Yeah. That's one thing. However, I understand what you're saying. And I think that the way how I would describe it is that I'm going to be turning cost centers of mine into profit centers.
Yeah.
But, that's something that should probably be reserved for people that already have scale.
Gotcha.
So like I have a lot of apartments. That side of my business is going well. Frankly, I could just live off of the equity for the rest of my life and be fine. However, I do still intend to ultimately expand again one day. I reserved this year for finishing a lot of my projects, and I know that they're like your friends who are also my friends, John and Matt, like they're Bombachi and Premium. That is, they're, we were kind of talking about this last year, and we were like, yeah, we're just going to keep spending the entire year finishing up our projects, and maybe doing a couple here and there, but it's not going to be an expansion of the same magnitude that we had in years past.
Yeah.
And I do think that was the wise move for us. Now, if you're just getting started, there's a different answer to that question, right? So you don't have cost centers yet. Your cost centers are like your car payment, your mortgage, all that good stuff.
Yeah.
So in that case, if you're trying to get into real estate and you really want to get into real estate now, just the environment's hard, but there's going to be a lot of reward for people that can figure out how to play it. And
absolutely.
Because I'm already at this stage, I don't have the same motivation to go out and do that stuff. So I'm trying to find alternative measures to kind of keep my mind occupied with cool new things, because, frankly, real estate can really torture you over time. And I don't want to like scare anyone away, because, frankly, like this is what's made me all of my wealth in my entire life, right? It's all been through real estate.
Yeah.
But it's hard to make that level of wealth now compared to what it was like a few years ago. You really have to pick your locations. You have to pick your battles. You have to pick your asset class. You have to do everything right now. And I only want to do deals where everything is right in real estate.
Yeah.
And it's hard to do that if you have less skill. And I'm not saying that I'm like a super skilled operator or whatever, but I am experienced enough to know the distinction between those.
Yeah. Absolutely, man. It makes a ton of sense. You know what I mean? And I definitely agree with you. Hell yeah.
Thanks, man. No, it's been cool though. Like I have to say, like over the last few years, a lot of my stuff has kind of morphed into what I needed it to be. Because I was also ignorant of that 3 years issue for a long time. Even as late as like 2021, I was ignorant of that issue. So now a lot of my projects are like they're on the upswing. My bad luck, I'm not going to jinx it. My bad luck last year hopefully will not transfer into 2024.
Knock on wood.
Yeah, knock on wood. That's why I'm not going to say it won't, but I'm hopeful. I think that, this is definitely a good time to be thinking about how to get into real estate. And maybe just maybe it may not be the best time to begin. However, if you don't begin, then you'll never really understand in the first place. And if you ever encounter an environment like this, you won't know what to do. Yeah. So I don't know. I think that there's definitely opportunities. But I'm not as bullish on the industry in the short term as many other people are.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense, man. And I love having that conversation and hearing people's thoughts as well. Because, even with, people that you and I both know, there are a lot of people, at least from kind of like what I've gathered, that are either like on the sidelines, just like waiting for shit to pan out. So, a lot of people are still aggressively buying. Like there are, still deals out there. But like you said, like you have to have the, the fortitude and the drive a lot more, nowadays to be able to go out and turn over those stones. And then a lot of people somewhere in the middle of the spectrum just trying to like figure it out, Yeah.
And the people that would get analysis paralysis are going to be like short circuiting over this environment, because now nothing that you analyze looks great. Right. Yeah. So like now you have to figure out alternative measures, and the people that were already going to get stuck and may not get into the industry because of how tight things perceivably were back then. Now they're just going to be like, what do I do? Yeah. And I think that that's a dangerous thing for the industry too, because it's only going to make it so that like people like me want to just keep expanding, and people that are way larger than me, because those people do exist, and they're orders of magnitude larger than me, and those people keep buying, and then there becomes a concentration of wealth at the top that can potentially not be undone in a reasonable manner.
Yeah.
So you got to get out there and like start analyzing. Just analyze. Even if you don't go out and buy something, just like analyze a bunch of stuff. And then like one day you're going to come across a great deal that's actually going to be a great deal. And you'll only know that because you've analyzed so many other ones, and you'll be like, oh, I could do this one. So even if you're just sitting back and you haven't executed yet, like just underwrite a bunch of stuff. Like pass your numbers on to people that know what they're doing. Don't send them to me because I won't respond to my emails. But like it just keep analyzing stuff, and eventually you're going to find one that you're like, oh, I can make this work. Whether it's doing the stuff that you do with like the medium term rentals, right?
Yep.
Yeah, like the medium term rental stuff, like some like I could never make a triplex pencil in this environment, right? But like somehow you're making money on triplexes, so clearly you're doing something right that I don't know what to do. I'm selling I sold all mine because I was like, screw this. These things have no margins, but yours actually have pretty decent margins because you're doing a different strategy. I'm not interested in doing that strategy. I don't have the extra capacity to alter my infrastructure to accommodate that sort of thing. But if you're a midterm rental person and you come across a triplex that has like a bajillion bedrooms or a student housing deal that has a bajillion bedrooms, and you're like, hey, I can make this work, and I have the infrastructure and the skill I feel I have the infrastructure and the skill to do this. Yeah, pull the trigger, man. Pull the trigger.
Yeah. Exactly, man. And it's one of those things too. It's funny you say that about the MTR, because it's my building is definitely performing very well. Knock on wood at the moment. But at the same time, man, like, yeah, knock on wood, exactly. The thing is like, I don't know if I would do the MTR thing again. You could go like a whole different route with this too. But like, like the thing that I think about it, man, right, is I feel like it's one of those things that if like you have the, like, I don't want to say like the like proper network for it, of like basically a lot of the like staffing agencies and vendors, and like really, intimate relationships with those folks on a pretty close basis, to be able to basically shrink the vacancy and stay ahead of it. Because the leases are a lot different. And like for example, man, like I had my tenant, I ended up getting a nurse in that unit on December 22nd, and she was supposed to be in there until April 20th ish. And things were going good, and we had the conversation recently, and she about like is the hospital extending your contract, like do you kind of have an idea of what's going on? And she told me, she's like, oh yeah, absolutely, like hands down, I should be there until like June or July, like everything's dope. I'm like, friggin' perfect. And knock on wood, she's been absolutely phenomenal too. Like incredible, man. And she texted me the other day. She's like, hey, so like, I hate to tell you this, but like the hospital didn't budge on my contract. So like, she's like, do you mind if I, just pay on April 1st for the whole month of April, and then I'm out, at the end of the month? Like they didn't budge. Yeah. And I was like, yeah, I'm like, that's totally fine. You know what I mean? Like, I'm like, it was a blessing to have you guys. Like, thank you so much for everything. Like, you're great.
Yeah.
But I'm like, it is what it is. And now I'm like fucking scrambling, man. I'm like, because it's like, it's one of those things. It's like, I have it posted all over the place, but it's not like your traditional unit where like you just throw it on Zillow or Facebook or whatever, and like people flock to you. Right. It's like, because it's such a niche thing, there's a lot of work on my end, but where I've struggled, man, was one, it was the setting it up. And like, a lot of that was self-inflicted. There was a huge learning curve that took way fucking too long, man. Like, it's
welcome. The learning curve has only just begun, Kyle.
Exactly. That thing was vacant for way fucking too long, man. But
they all are. That's the problem. They all are. And like to your point, I mean, MTR or student housing or any of that sort of thing, like, you have to specialize in it. So my friend that I was telling you about earlier, the one who started at the same time as me, he's much smarter than me, better deal maker than me. He is exclusively in student and midterm rentals. And he's said since the beginning of our careers, like we've had a lot of talks, and his outlook has changed, and he ended up accumulating a ton of these units, like a ton. I don't even know how many it is, but it's probably close to triple digits of like students, like actual individual tenants renting bedrooms. Dang. So like he's done phenomenally well, but he built his whole infrastructure on that. And he's so smart. He managed to build an AI system that like figures out how to like screen his tenants. That, like I said, the guy's just absolutely brilliant. He's like, he's phenomenal. And like, he's got the systems all down pat, but like you have to be really committed to doing that strategy, full on committed to doing just that strategy. Yeah. Because as soon as you start deviating from it, your wires are going to get crossed and you're going to be like, why the hell am I still doing this? Why does it require so much toughness? Like, I hate this. Like, I don't want to do this anymore. And I'm going to go back to renting to people at the market rate for a 2-bedroom or 3-bedroom or whatever you have.
Exactly. And that's kind of where I'm at now, man. I'm like, I've gone back and forth with it because, I mean, like, full disclosure, guys, like for my 2-bed in Leominster, it's average. It's not, A-class spectacular. Like, it's all right. It's, I don't know, probably like B-, C+ type of unit. I could rent that thing market for a regular long-term tenant, probably like 1,600-ish. Now I'm getting 2,400 from my MTR tenant. But that being said, I pay for oil for that unit, which kind of blows, but it is what it is, man. It's been decent, but I pay for oil, Wi-Fi, electric, and then if you count, water, sewer, but whatever, for 2 people.
Oh, you count it in Worcester County. You count that shit.
Shit's friggin' expensive, man. But, like, so it basically leaves an extra spread of, I net another like 500-ish bucks a month from doing it with the MTR strategy, and the management is pretty much the same because I treat it like a regular tenant at the end of the day. I'm like, it's just like a 6-month lease. Like, they sign the regular leases, like security deposit, like the whole thing is the same on that, on that end. Yeah. But it's like, that's the way I look at it, man. Like, do you know Andrew Bosco on Candor?
Yes, I do know Andrew Bosco.
Yes. So Andrew crushes it. And I love you, dude, if you're listening to this.
I do too, Andrew. Even though you piss me off sometimes, I still love you.
The way I look at the MTR thing right now, man, is like, if you, like I said, I feel like it's a big game of just like the vacancy, of just eliminating the vacancy. Yeah. Like, if you have the rest of it all set up, like the computer and the advertising, like whatever, everything's great. The systems, everything's fine, whatever. But it's just making sure that like everything continues to line up and doing it all in advance. And that's something that I've definitely continued to struggle with. And now I'm like scrambling a little bit. I'm like, who do I need to
like, let me play a scenario out for you, Kyle. So let's say that you had a 100-unit MTR portfolio and you ran into the same problem that I encountered in my New Hampshire portfolio last year, right? Where, you buy it and 25% of the tenants leave in the very first winter. You get those 25 units completely renovated, ready to rent, and then another 25% leave. And then as you're doing those ones over, another 15% leave from the inherited tenant pool.
Yeah.
And then once you're finally done with that and you've got all those MTRs filled and you've spent all those months filling those MTRs, the people that were initially on the MTR contracts are all expiring now, and you have to replace them with someone new.
Yeah.
How tough are you? Right? Like, that's what ends up happening. And I think that that's probably a good reason why you're sort of skeptical of it, is that sometimes those things are harder to keep scale without something like a full management team, AI helping you and that sort of thing. Yeah. Which again goes back to like my friend being brilliant and me not being smart enough to do that industry, like be in that particular part of the industry. It's very difficult. The scaling is difficult. I'm not sure what the lending picture looks like for MTR stuff, but I would imagine you still have to go through a lot of like residential type loans for those types of buildings. No?
Yeah. I mean, mine was unique because it's one of the units in my 3-family. So the other 2 are long-term, and one of them, that was my like experiment unit. One of them's medium-term. So it's like, it's regular, like FHA, all the normal shit. I just like, I didn't buy it directly. I didn't know I wanted to do MTR until like, the right time, like the stars align kind of thing. And I'm like, well, it's now or never, I'm like, am I in, or like, what's the deal? But yeah,
I think you're in. I think you're in. I think you'll do quite well. You're very good at filling market rate apartments that are, long-term leases. Like I know that for a fact. So at the very least, I think that you'll have a promising career in that respect. I would say that for your next building, if I were to give you any words of advice as like an older brother or whatever, I would say maybe focus on the buildings that have more margins, right? And in areas that, maybe they're not as nice as Leominster, which, if you told someone that like 7 years ago, they'd laugh at you and say Leominster is nice. But in today's world, you kind of got to go out further. You got to go into more tertiary markets. If you're chasing yield, of course, like if you're chasing value, then obviously just like stay in the big cities or whatever and don't make money and all that good stuff. Because ultimately, if you're doing your real estate correctly, which is to say you're doing value add real estate, like you are, like I am, like our friends are. Yeah. I would say that no matter what you do and where you go, cash flow is largely a myth until the properties are stabilized, because you're going to keep having that sieve of old tenants just like pouring out, and you're going to have so many construction costs that even though you might have like 60 to 80% of the project completed, those last 20% are going to feel like they just take a lifetime. And you only really reach the cash flow when you're stabilized. So like, it's not so much a matter of like, I guess what I'm trying to say is like, people say invest for cash flow. And that's true. That's what you want to do. However, you have to understand that for most of us, the cash flow is not there until the project is stabilized. Yeah. And so I think that if you were to choose commercial as your avenue or your vector for doing this, you might have even more success because of the fact that you could rely on a construction loan so that you're not constantly pouring money out of your personal funds or your HELOCs or what have you. Yeah. And then you have that juicy as complete valuation that if you do manage to finish in time, you can use that to refinance it with no like external market risk. Yeah. I call it like a boomerang because like I feel like I'm just like constantly just tossing it out and then just getting the refinance at the very end and not having to do anything or bear any market risk, which is cool. But like that's what you got to do. You got to pick markets where there are still margins, and do things in a way that is conducive to having that cash flow upon stabilization. Yeah. I think that if you don't do that and you make the mistakes that I did early in my career, or even midway through my career, you'll end up being a little disappointed in the results, right? Like I think that if you go with commercial, though, it gives you a sense. It gives you an idea of how to scale. I know that like most of us, like I'm like me, John, Matt, like all of us guys that have been doing this, and the generation before me too, like my good friend Dan Botwinick, who is an absolutely amazing dude, just a phenomenal man, as well as a phenomenal investor, much larger than I'll ever be. He has his own niche now that's outside of multifamily, and he's just an absolute monster in everything that he's ever done. Like all of us, we all started with the same triplex or the same fourplex. I technically lived in a duplex at the time that I refinanced and used to buy my first deal. So maybe duplex for me, triplex for you. Eventually you start buying these commercial buildings, and that's the moment everything changes. So I would say like, if you want to keep getting better and better scale, go commercial. Use my friend Pat Brady for your loans. And I'm not just shamelessly plugging him. Like I genuinely believe that he was probably, I met him through my friend Dan, the one that I was just mentioning. Like, he has single-handedly changed the entire trajectory of my whole career, all for like a mortgage broker's fee. Like, that's so
okay.
The return on that is outrageous. Yeah, like I like the deal that we have in Fitchburg. Like Pat managed to get them to hold a 3.5% rate all the way from January 2022 to August when we closed. If they adjusted that to market, it would have been 6. But he got them to hold it. So that 1% fee that I paid him for that loan saved me $1 million.
Fucking crazy, man.
Investment. And like that's just the way it is. And then, from that, like I would say as a follow-up, for you in the future, I think, becoming a syndicator is a good strategy. Or you got to find a good sugar daddy. That's the bottom line. I mean, real estate is nothing but being a good sugar baby and multiplying your sugar daddy's or mommy's returns.
Yeah. I love that analogy, man. Absolutely.
Is you want to keep using other people's money. Yeah. And in order to keep using other people's money, you have to multiply it. So find a good sugar daddy, treat them well.
Amen. I love it, man. Hell yeah. So Mike, last but not least, my man, where on like social media and stuff can you be found? I'll tag anything you want down below.
Oh, thanks. Well, I guess if you really want to follow me and just see all the memes that I post, because I rarely post about real estate, I'm probably
awesome.
the most low-key real estate dude on planet Earth. On Instagram, I'm at Mike Marchetti. And on Facebook, I'm just Mike Marchetti. Like, you can find me anywhere. I'm very low-key. I never talk about real estate. So if you are trying to follow me, and I appreciate it, Kyle, if you are trying to follow me, just know I rarely post about real estate unless I'm very happy about something, and I never divulge like the amounts that I make or don't make or whatever on any of that stuff, because I think that a lot of my experience in the industry has made me jaded with the way how, you know, people sort of act and behave within this space. And like, we all know what you're really doing.
Yeah.
You know?
Yep.
Like stop pretending.
Exactly.
I don't pretend. And the reason for that is because there's nothing to pretend about anymore.
Yeah.
I'm at a point now where my only competition is the person that I look at in the mirror every morning. And I'm not trying to impress anyone. So if you're looking for me posting pictures of me with a Lamborghini, maybe in the future, but like, and talking about all my real estate stuff, it's just not going to happen. But if you want to just see pictures of me, and just like hanging out and memes of random bullshit, that's where you can see it.
Absolutely, man. I love it, Mike. Thank you so much for coming on here, man. This was friggin' awesome.
Hey, thanks for having me, dude. Anytime that you want me on, just let me know. I'm happy to talk about a variety of different topics. Whatever you want me to talk about, I'm happy to do it. You know, you've been really good to me. You've helped me with my project, and I can't thank you enough. So this is really the least I can do. And again, like, you know, going back to the other thing, I feel kind of guilty about like the social media stuff. I'm absolutely a friendly dude. I'm not saying I won't talk to you. I'm just saying I'm not going to post the stuff that you probably want me to.
Yeah. That's all right, man. That's awesome. I love it. How we doing, guys? So Mike just wanted to add in one more detail before this episode concluded. And that being is that the exit of a deal is where the value is made. The cash flow is great, but the true value is after you make the exit, you know? So just wanted to add that little snippet in there, my friends. Definitely a you know, phenomenal part to kind of cap off our entire conversation for this episode. I hope you enjoy. And yeah, I will catch you all in the next one. Goodbye.
That's a wrap for today's episode. We want to thank you for being a valued listener of the Creating Wealth Podcast. Make sure to visit www.creatingwealth.com to connect with us. Dive into our ever-expanding library of informative blogs and explore a wide range of additional valuable resources. Stay tuned for our next episode as we continue to create wealth together.